It can take many weeks, months, and sometimes years, if ever, to get over trauma. Everybody processes it differently. Some people will say, if he ever hit me, or if she ever hit me, I'm out the door after the first time. I used to say the same thing until it happened to me. Sometimes I sit in peace and wonder, how did I end up in pieces? You want to know? Listen. I was married to a monster. Hindsight is 20/20. I can see everything so clearly now. I can look back and see the love bombing. It was crazy and exciting at the same time. I must admit, I felt like a teenager who had a crush, and that crush had a crush on me. You know those butterflies you get from new and exciting love? How you would start to write your names together and circle them in the hearts. How you knew you would be looking back and say, give me a chance, yes or no, you know. But I look back and I see all the signs that will point to a future disaster. A life of heartache accompanied by a side of mental, physical, psychological, and emotional abuse. But most of all, and most damaging, was the spiritual abuse I suffered at his rotten, poisonous hand. I lived with a demon. The air in the house was thick. Sometimes it was thick, and I couldn't explain it. I used to buy candles. I used to buy so many candles. I had so many air fresheners and so many plug-ins. In a feeble attempt to air the place out, I would even boil cinnamon. Yet nothing seemed to work. I am convinced it was demonic activity going on in that house. Why? Because the moment I left, I was able to breathe. The air became fresh, and that stench, that thick, unwelcome feeling was gone. It was gone at last. He came to a place where I used to study the Bible, and I remember thinking that he was a new pastor in the church, but he wasn't. I thought that way because he spoke so eloquently, and the things he used to say were so deep. I must admit, it caught my attention and made me raise my head. I remember thinking, who is speaking that way? It's funny now as I look back, but not really. It's no laughing matter. If I could go back, I would run like hell, because that's where I would eventually find myself climbing out of. I was separated from my ex. Yeah, I know. I shouldn't have been dating while I was still in the situation, but it is what it is. Or shall I say, it was what it was. He was a nice guy from my outward look at him. He wanted to take my daughter to an amusement park with his kids, and I didn't see anything wrong with that. I remember the first time he saw me, he turned around and he was shaking. It was like he was shocked that he saw something he'd never seen before. He told me when the first time he saw me, I had glasses on and I was so beautiful. Yeah. What he really saw was his next victim. That's what he really saw, was his next victim. This had to be summer of 2012. Yeah, I think it was June 2012 because that's when my other nightmare began. But looking back, those nightmares were really because of him. Well, I can't say it was all him, but he was the cause. Well, I don't want to say that either, but he was there. The fact is, when he showed up in my life, all hell just broke loose. So it is fair and safe to say that he is the common denominator. The monster that I married was the common denominator to the major problems in my life from the moment I turned around with those damn glasses on. Those glasses. Nice frames. Yeah. My daughter was so excited to go to an amusement park. In fact, she wanted my permission to go with him and his children to Six Flags. So that day at that place we used to go to learn about God, I turned around, shook hands, and introduced myself as her mother and gave permission for her to go to the park. We exchanged telephone numbers because it was the right thing to do, and especially because he was going to be taking my daughter to a park. I wanted to have contact with him, and so we can just discuss plans a little further. That too was a mistake, a huge mistake. Looking back, I can clearly see all the signs of danger. It flashes in my mind like a bright light atop a tower. It flashes like lightning rings streaking across a dark sky. Danger. I left a message on his voicemail regarding the outing to the amusement park, and at the same time he was calling me. We made arrangements, and he picked my daughter up. They came back about 10:30 that night, and I remember him walking to the door, letting me know that she had a good time. There were so many bugs flying around the light on the porch. I wanted to shut the door, but I wanted to talk to him some more to find out, about their little play date. I wanted to talk to him too. I wanted to find out who this man really was. What's his story? Because he looked like he had a story. It's so weird. He avoided eye contact as if he was searching for the most appropriate script to recite this time. He seemed to be scrolling through the Rolodex of his personas to play. Whatever he chose will prove to be a lie. He got me. And that's how it started. I invited him in. We sat down in the living room. The kids played around downstairs, and we talked. At that time, I was taking a Bible course. I was finishing up one of my degrees in school, and I was telling him about my class, and he seemed to be very impressed. This man had a story. I was impressed too. And I asked him, "Do you ever think you're going to get married again?" And I remember him saying, "If I find the right one, I don't know where she is. She could be in this congregation." And I remember thinking, she is. She's me. So weird. So weird. He started calling nonstop. I mean, calling nonstop. And I answered every time he called. If I had only known what those calls would lead up to. If I had only known. But I didn't. I found out though. I found out. We started spending time together, and slowly but surely he started taking up every second, every moment that I had. It started going to him, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the time that we spent together, going out with the kids a lot, and my daughter enjoyed it so much. She had a playmates, and I had company. I eventually did get divorced, and I moved. I remember a lot of people thinking that I moved in with him, and I didn't. I moved into a townhouse of my own, and we were dating, and still in this religion. Both of us were. And even in my home, he would come, and I keep saying that it's weird and it's crazy because I'm looking back now and I see it all as craziness. But it wasn't crazy while I was in it, because I was in a relationship that didn't seem crazy. It seemed like it was love. It was new. It was fresh. It wasn't any abuse that I was aware of. But he would come to my house. I would go to his house, and he lived not too far from where my house was. He would help me, taking my daughter to school. We would take the kids to school together, actually. We just lived our lives together, and in this religion, you're not supposed to have sex before you're married. And we had sex before we were married. And I remember saying, thinking that, okay, so we have to say something about this, right? We have to say something about this, because in this religion, you have to confess. You have to confess, and if you're not sorry enough before men, they will put you out. And we were both put out of the religion before, and he told me that he was put out for 3 years, and he said that he didn't want to be married to his first wife, and he had planned to commit adultery so he can get divorced, and that's what he did. Not with me, but he had already been divorced when I met him. And so that was that. But he told me not to. I remember him saying, "You're with a brother now, and you don't talk to any other brothers without my permission." And that sounds kind of crazy saying it. But I was like, oh, okay. I'm like, okay, I have a head now. He's a spiritual head now. I don't have to deal with these men, because I had been in, and what they call it is, it's kind of set up like a government, like a court. They have men who judge you, 3 men who judge you based on what you say and how they think you feel based on what you say. But it's really not, they're not judges, they're not therapists. So most of the time it is wrong. And that's a whole other conversation, but both of us had experienced that before, and he didn't want to deal with that again because he just didn't want to deal with that again. I didn't want to deal with it again, but I was so indoctrinated that I always felt like if I had done anything wrong, and I had started with this religion since when I was 15 years old. And so I was trained to believe that anytime I had done something wrong or committed any gross sins, that I had to confess my sins. And I did, every time. Nobody never caught me doing anything. If I had committed a gross sin, I went and I confessed my sins to these men. And so this time I wanted to go and confess my sins to these men. And he said, wait a minute. I am your head. You get your discipline from me. So I said, okay, and you be submissive to me first. I am your head. And I said, oh, okay. All right. Well, hey, it is what it is. And I'm willingly going to listen, but it bothered me. It bothered me so much. And that was the downfall. And I will go more into it as I reveal more about this monster that I was married to. But that's the way that it was. I was supposed to be a submissive wife, and I gladly accepted that role. I wanted a spiritual head, and I wanted to be a submissive wife, and I was, and it was okay because that's what I wanted to do. That's what I signed up for. I didn't want to be beat into submission, that's for sure. But I wanted to confess, and he said no. So we knew that we had to get married. We were going to get married. That was the plan, that for us to be married. I didn't get divorced to be married. Of course, I was separated. My ex, we're on good terms now. You'll be hearing from him. He's going to be on the podcast. We co-parent wonderfully. And you'll be hearing from him, but we're better friends. We're divorced, and I ended up remarrying, which was the right thing to do, especially if I wanted to be in this religion and I wanted to have a good standing before God. So we decided that we were going to get married. And things will be okay with God. So that's what I accepted, but it still bothered me. And throughout the marriage, I would bring it up to him. I would say, listen, we have to say something because I'm not okay with this. I don't want to feel like I'm hiding something from this, from God, And he would just say, no, aren't you being blessed? And that was something that I believe he hated me for wanting to be clean in that aspect. Yeah. He hated me for that. And I think that is when the abuse really kicked in and kicked up. And I suffered so much because I wanted to be right with God. And I would think that a spiritual man would appreciate that from his wife, especially a spiritual wife who was being submissive. And I'm not saying that I was perfect, because nobody is perfect. But what I am saying is that I was a good wife. I was a submissive wife because I wanted to be, not because somebody was making me do it. It's something that I wanted to be. And anybody that knows us, anybody that knows me, they know that I'm telling the truth. So I'm not in that situation anymore, but I still deal with the remnants of the trauma that I've suffered at his hands. And the trauma that I suffered because of this religion as well. And I am so thankful that I'm not afraid to speak up and to speak out. I'm not afraid to do that now. And I hope that my testimony will help somebody one day. And maybe that day is today. Thank you for listening.